What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Podium Pushers podcast with Justin and Brandon. What better way to start off the 2025 Formula One season than with a double header? We are here to predict the Chinese Grand Prix fresh off the Australian Grand Prix. Things are kicking off in the 2025 Formula One season. Brandon, you've cooked up some good predictions. How you feeling?
I'm feeling great. Predictions went very well last weekend. It's a doubleheader, our second episode of the week, which I'm pumped about as well. So I'm feeling great.
Let's kick it off with Podium Pusher of the weekend. I've gone with Fernando Alonso. Had a tough start to the season with a crash at the Australian Grand Prix. Wasn't his fault. I've watched that replay a couple times. There's clearly gravel all the way on the track that he ran over. So I think he's coming back to China. He's one of the more experienced drivers on the grid. Has more experience at that track than almost any other driver on the grid. So I think Fernando is going to rebound well at China. I'm predicting him as Podium Pusher of the weekend.
I'm going with Carlos Sainz. It's kind of up in the air as to whether or not his crash was completely his fault or the car or what, but I think Carlos is going to respond well to that adversity, bounce back, have a great weekend in China.
Back marker of the weekend, I've gone for Nico Hülkenberg. I think this is for the simple fact that people are going to be hyping him up a little bit too much after scoring some points in Australia. I still think that Sauber is the slowest car on the grid. I don't care that they scored points. I don't care that they got a car in the Q2. I still think it's either them and the Haas that is the slowest car on the grid. So I think they're kind of going to come crashing back down to earth. I don't expect them to score any points this weekend. I'm not expecting two good weekends in a row out of Nico Hülkenberg.
For my back mark of the weekend, I've gone with Isaac Hadjar.
As sad as kicking him when he's down. He had the worst weekend last time, and now you're just throwing him 2 weekends in a row.
I know. I'm really not trying to kick him while he's down like Helmut Marko did. That was rough. But I think Isaac just needs a little bit more experience. China is a pretty unique track. So I don't know that Isaac is going to do well there. He hasn't had a lot of opportunities to race there yet. With COVID and all that, we didn't race in China for like 4 years in a row, which is crazy. So I think Isaac is going to have a tough weekend, and we'll have to see how he does in the sprint and the race. That's also another added element that he hasn't really experienced yet before. Kind of pressure is on right from the beginning of the weekend, so there's not really any room for error on the sprint weekend. So I think Isaac might be in for some tough luck.
Let's make some predictions for the very first sprint of the year. It's the second week. We're going to do that thing again this year where we have like 3 sprints at the front of the season, go 16 weeks, forget that it exists, and then do it again. But it's the first sprint of the season. Sprint poll. I've gone with Max Verstappen. I know maybe I'm taking things a little bit. I'm going a little crazy after seeing him finish second and maybe thinking that Red Bull is quicker than it is. But as long as that car is anywhere near the front, you simply cannot count out Max Verstappen. There's also that new FIA technical directive that makes the gap in the rear wing a little bit smaller. That should impact McLaren more than it impacts Red Bull. So I'm feeling good about Max Verstappen. I think he will take home the first sprint pole of the season.
I've gone with Lando Norris for sprint pole. I think Lando is just, it was the best drive of his career in Australia. His 5th win in Formula One. He's riding a high right now, and I think he's going to continue to do well, take a sprint pole.
I've gone with Lando Norris as my sprint winner. It's hard for me to predict against the McLarens right now. They clearly look like the fastest car in both the dry and the wet last weekend in Australia. So until something changes, I see a reason to predict otherwise. I'm going to have to keep predicting McLaren. For now, I think it's going to be Lando Norris that wins the sprint.
Yeah, I agree with that. Obviously, I predicted him to take pole, and I think where the McLaren really stands out is race pace. While some other cars might be able to get up there in qualifying and shake some things up, I think in long runs, I think McLaren is far and away the best. So if Lando gets pole, I think there's no way he's not going to win that race.
Keeping it on the Lando Norris hype train here, pole for the Grand Prix. I've gone with Lando Norris. I've said it all already, and I don't want this to fall into what we were doing for Max Verstappen for the last 2 years, but it just feels like it is the obvious prediction. I think Lando Norris feels at home with that car. He's in a groove. He's got some momentum. I think he has worked through some of the mental things that were holding him back last year. He seems happier. He seems more relaxed. So I don't have a reason to predict against Lando Norris at the moment. I think he's taking pole at China.
Yeah, I am shaking things up a little bit. I'm going with Oscar Piastri.
Still a McLaren driver. It's not that big
Still
of
a
a shakeup.
McLaren driver, not shaking things up too much, but Oscar had a great weekend in Australia, up up until he went off in poor conditions. That I don't even think that was his fault entirely. Both of McLarens went off actually. So anyway, I think Oscar is going to bounce back. I think, man, he showed a lot of respect to the team when they told him to hold position when he was getting close to Lando. I think Oscar easily had the pace to pass Lando there, and it would have been a tight race for the McLarens if he had done that. And I think Oscar is kind of maybe getting to the point where he's done doing that, because if Oscar had passed Lando, who knows what the situation would have been? Would Oscar have been able to get the preferential strategy, win the race, his home race? I don't know. We don't know. But I think Oscar sniffed a little bit of victory there, and I don't think he's going to back down this time.
Let's move on to our podium predictions. In P3, I have gone with Max Verstappen. I had someone else in my third place, but I have changed it based on just reflecting upon how good of a driver Max Verstappen is. I simply cannot put him anywhere else besides on my podium. It's just the way it is. I know that Red Bull is not the quickest car. We saw Liam Lawson struggle mightily last weekend, but I think Max Verstappen is just such a good driver that he can get the absolute maximum out of that car. He'll be able to perform even when the team itself seems to be a little bit further behind. So I'm going Max Verstappen P3.
I'm also going Max Verstappen P3 basically for all the reasons that you just said, but I again don't necessarily. I think Ferrari may not have a bad weekend, but they're not going to be up there fighting for podiums, fighting for pole position, fighting for wins, and I think the person that will be up there is Max Verstappen. Mercedes showed some great pace this weekend. George and Kimi both had fantastic races in Australia, but I do think that car is a little bit of a step behind Max. Maybe not Liam, but for the moment, I think just Max is ahead of them. So we'll have to see what happens, but I think it's going to be Max and P3.
Second place, I've gone with Oscar Piastri. Let's be honest here. We're probably looking at another McLaren 1-2, especially if it stays dry. I do think Oscar Piastri, great driver, but I do still think he's just slightly behind Lando Norris. So I predicted Lando on pole. I think if Lando does that, has his starts figured out, he probably keeps that lead. Oscar Piastri finishes P2.
We go with Lando Norris P2. I put Oscar on pole, and I think if Oscar gets pole, I think there's a really good chance he can win the race. If Lando's on pole, I don't know that Oscar's going to be able to get him off the line. We'll have to see.
Well, let's be honest. We've already revealed our P1. I went with Lando Norris. You went with Oscar Piastri. So do you think it really just comes down to which McLaren takes pole, and that's who's going to win the Chinese Grand Prix?
At this point, I really do. I really think that if the conditions are dry and nothing crazy happens, like red flags, anything like that, I think it's going to come down to who takes pole and who can maintain the lead going through turn one.
Our one push-in prediction, my push-in prediction for the weekend, is that all 10 teams will have scored at least 1 point after this weekend. So Alpine, Racing Bulls, and Haas are the teams that need to score. I think we were a little surprised to not see Alpine bring home a point, and Racing Bulls should have scored if they didn't have incompetent strategists on the pit wall who somehow threw away Yuki Tsunoda's P5. Haas, they look a little slow, but with a sprint and a Grand Prix this weekend, I'm thinking they might sneak it in. So upon further reflection and Haas needing to score, maybe I'm not the most confident on this, but it feels bold. I wanted to be bold for the second Grand Prix of the year, so that is my push-in prediction.
I think it's a great prediction. It's a great amount of bold as well as realistic, and we'll see if my prediction is also bold and realistic. I am saying that Ferrari is going to score at least 25 points across the weekend. That is kind of a high amount, given the fact we just talked about we have no idea where Ferrari's going to be, and they looked horrible in Australia. But we do have a sprint, and we do have a Grand Prix, so 2 point scoring opportunities. And if you're looking at a double points finish that isn't on the podium for either of those races, I think it's possible. But you never know. So
Yeah, I think it's gonna be right around that. I mean, we're looking in like the 22 to 27 point range. You're thinking they score 7 or 8 in the sprint, 15 to 20 in the Grand Prix. So it's borderline, not guaranteed, but certainly is the perfect amount of bold. I think we could be cooking here for sure. The fans at Envy Rudy says McLaren 1-2 with Max third. We would agree with that prediction. At Ethan.Smeelan says Charles, Max, and Lando finish P1, P2, and P3. And at Daniel_Marsh_ says Yuki podium finish.
all those would be amazing.
Well, that is all we have got for our predictions for the Chinese Grand Prix, the first sprint weekend of the year. Before we get out of here, Brandon, what are your parting podium thoughts?
Man, I'm excited for China. I know I feel like I say that every parting podium thought opportunity, but I am truly pumped. I think it's a great venue. It's going to be a great race. Last year, it seemed like a fantastic atmosphere. So I'm excited to see it back. And, you know, I'm not going to be staying up for this one. Stayed up a little bit for Australia. Fell asleep watching the Grand Prix, but it's just a little too late for me.
Yeah,
China.
can't stay up for that 2 a.m. start time. Cannot do that. Cannot do that. But I don't blame you for being excited, because I'm excited when we go into these podcasts, then we make our predictions, and I'm even more excited. So I can't blame you for being excited, each and every one of your parting podium thoughts. But that is all we've got for this episode. As always, thank you for watching or listening to another episode of the Podium Pushers podcast. It truly means the world that you let us talk to you about Formula One. If you haven't already, be sure to like, subscribe, follow, do all of the things. We'll be back in a few short days to react to the Chinese Grand Prix. Until then, have a great day and God bless.
See ya.